Well, I'm delighted to say I've got staunch Brexiteer and political commentator Patrick O'Flynn back on the channel today. Patrick, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, Michael. Happy New Year from an independent Britain, eh? At long last.
Absolutely. Now, Patrick, I wanted to talk to you today because you've written a piece which I think is actually quite important for the Telegraph, in which you've basically said that we need to be shouting about the gains of Brexit. Can you just elaborate, explain to people a bit more your view on this?
Well, I think take a step back and what do we know really about Labour and the Liberal Democrats and everyone who would rather be an alternative government, that whatever they say and whatever particularly Keir Starmer says about accepting it's over and making the best of it, the one of their abiding motivations in politics is to strip meaning and sovereignty from a nation state and put it into a European superstate. They've been massively intense about it, as we've seen from their behaviour since they lost the referendum. There is no way we can trust Labour or the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the SNP, any of them, if they get a whiff of power, not to try and unpick Brexit. They are going to. It's just a matter of when, and maybe if Starmer wheedled his way into Downing Street, he might not do that much in a first term, but it would be one of his strategic goals. It's what the Labour Party is. So we still have battles to win. We don't have to be quite as het up about that as we were about winning the referendum itself and then finally getting the verdict of the people implemented, but we can't just rest on our laurels. And one of the things we need to do is be, as you say, shout about and draw the public attention to the gains that we make, whether it's faster trade deals with other countries, whether it's being nimble and fleet-footed enough, for instance, to run our own vaccine program and leave the EU in the slipstream, or animal welfare measures like banning pulse fishing and a ban coming up later in the year on live exports. We have to, and indeed, of course, the tampon tax has gone, and this is some of those have happened just in a couple of days. So we need to let all sorts of people in the electorate know that Brexit isn't only for right-wing bores or whatever. It's for everyone, and it's restoring democratic accountability and making prosperity easier to come by.
How effective do you think the government have been at this so far? I mean, one thing I've been highlighting on the channel, Patrick, was these the sort of trade deals that have been done by Liz Truss. And one of the reasons I wanted to highlight that is because I really don't think it's been promoted, that will certainly not reported that much in mainstream media. The fact that we were told, weren't we, all of these deals would take years.
Yeah.
We had to rely on the EU to have them. You couldn't do this in a short time frame. We couldn't negotiate them on our own. And yet they've been done, I think it's close to 60 in less than 2 years. That's one key example. I mean, what other things do you think really the government need to be promoting, and how effective do you think they've been up until this point doing that?
Well, I mean, it's obviously very, very early days. I think George Eustice at DEFRA is probably on it a bit, and Liz Truss is very talented at drawing attention to her successes as someone who undoubtedly will seek to stand in the next Tory leadership contest whenever that is. So I think there is a sort of internal competition within the cabinet to be seen to be delivering, and that's good. And whatever one thinks about Boris, he's a natural self-promoter. In my Telegraph piece, I used the example of how he came in as London mayor, and Ken Livingstone had already put orders and plans in place for these short-term hire bicycles, which became very popular, but they didn't get nicknamed Ken Cycles, they got nicknamed Boris Bikes. So some of that flair would be very welcome in terms of infrastructure projects. Before we got these EU structural funds back at about 50p in the pound to what we'd sent over to Brussels, and the EU was very good at getting its livery all over the hoardings and putting plaques in place to tell us how grateful we should feel. I'd like to see, some British branded stuff going on at levelling up infrastructure projects as well. But the other thing is, time will tell what the problems are and how being fleet-footed, as with the COVID vaccines, as with the furlough schemes, and running things at a nation state level can help us. But they haven't been great so far, but it's early days, and I do think the intention to show how divergence can help Britain is there.
Patrick, you write in your Telegraph piece, a PR blitz about highlighting every bit of EU red tape we cut would prove that leaving the EU has concrete benefits. Now, I know you for a long time were the chief political commentator at the Daily Express there. What's your view now on how the government should do that PR blitz? Do you still think it should be done through mainstream media, or do you actually think it should be done more through things like YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, etc.? What's your view on that?
I think the so-called mainstream media is still hostile overall, particularly the broadcast media, as we've seen with their coverage of what felt like a kind of funereal march into independence at 11 o'clock on New Year's Eve. And there have been some quite good spoof videos put out there which kind of get the message over that they were almost crying into their lattes or whatever it is they drink. So I think it's a hard sell for the government to get much out of the BBC, Sky, ITV, Channel 4 News. So yeah, they should definitely use alternative media, social media as part of their strategy. And a glimmer of hope is that a couple of these new non-left-wing news channels, is it News UK and GB News, I was inquiring yesterday, and there does seem to be every prospect that they can get on air by the spring, by March, April time. And I think they could have a massive audience, which would be very receptive to just a different blend on matters to do with Britain and Europe.
And just more widely, Patrick, you like me as someone who's campaigned for Brexit for a while now. What's your overview of the deal? What do you think the main gains of it are? Have you got any concerns? Where do you stand on the deal overall?
Well, I think from where Boris Johnson and Lord Frost came in and took the reins, they've done a pretty good job. Undoubtedly, had the Tories not handed Brexit to a Remainer at the start, we could have done even better, because she accepted things like the EU's demands for sequencing, which was to get all the stuff they wanted agreed before they even discussed what we wanted, and that reduced our leverage very significantly. But from where he came in, I think they've done well. I think the deal does secure our essential national sovereignty, albeit there are theoretical penalties, things that the EU could do if they don't like things that we could do. But I see that more as a sort of natural, realistic view of what happens in international diplomacy. Anyway, the European Court of Justice, apart from a couple of very small legacy areas, is cut out of the UK legal order. EU law is no longer supreme to our own. Obviously, the disappointment around fishing and coastal communities is there. Another 5.5 years of only slightly better access to the fish in our waters before we can set annual quotas with the EU. That's a long old time, and again, in that 5.5 year time frame, you may find as we come up to that moment, the Conservatives are prepared to sacrifice a further uplift for the British fleet in favour of other things and bigger industries. So I do understand people like Jude Mummery, raging about that. Personally, I think it's still, a gain, and we're coming back. We are sovereign over the waters, and we are, in 5.5 years going to be in a position to do even more by our fleet. But I can see why there's irritation and disappointment. I don't think it's fair to say Boris Johnson is Edward Heath Mark II or anything like that.
And finally, if you were in charge of this Brexit Gains PR blitz, Patrick, you mentioned immigration in your article. What would be the 3 key areas in the medium to long term that you would really focus on in terms of this?
Well, I certainly think immigration is the number one example of how EU law was not working for Britain and didn't really cater for our issues of social cohesion, pressure on housing, things like that. So yeah, very much make immigration control something, and a points-based system where people with the right attitudes and aptitudes who can help our country come in, but it's kind of quality, not quantity. I'm a bit sceptical again about whether the Conservatives will actually deliver lower immigration on the back of this, but we'll have to see that. So
well,
that
there's no excuses now, though, is there? That's the thing with Brexit.
No, I know.
No excuses.
But, you know, they've already signed a blank check for Hong Kong Chinese, which I think is a bit excessive personally. They've lowered the earnings threshold more generally in terms of when firms can recruit from abroad. I do sort of think that the Prime Minister's liberal instincts might be coming to the fore there, but at least we'll be able to hold them accountable for the policy, as you say, no excuses. So that would be one area. I think animal welfare in general is definitely an area where it's in the British culture to have higher standards, and the live export ban will be one area of that. And indeed, the pulse fishing already has. And there are parts, particularly of Southern Europe, which just don't share the British kind of attitude to animals, and maybe view it as sentimental, and maybe it is, but it's an authentic part of British society. So I think advances in that area can also reach out beyond the traditional kind of right of centre Brexit core, and allow people who are proud to think of themselves as progressives to see that actually the country isn't going to rack and ruin or becoming some sort of bigoted mess, but is better to be in charge of its own sort of sway and future. So those would be perhaps the two primary areas. I also think in the realm of taxation, being in complete charge of what we levy VAT on and at what rate. From our old UKIP days, I was considered a bit of a lefty on this, in that I quite like the idea of varying the rate of VAT, where you cut it right down on staple goods, but you have a higher rate you bring in for luxury goods, and that would kind of make VAT into a more progressive tax, because it's always criticised that because poor people spend more of their money on goods as a higher percentage than rich people, that VAT hits the poor and is a regressive tax. Well, I'd like to see us say a higher luxury goods rate, a lower rate on staple goods, and that again could be seen as a progressive agenda that kind of gives the lie to the claims by the Remainers that everything's going to go hard right, and you can't trust the British public to run their own affairs.
Well, look, you can certainly rely on this channel to be positive about the brilliant Brexit future ahead of us. Patrick O'Flynn, thank you very much for your time. Look forward to speaking to you more in the future as we see what the government do with our newfound Brexit freedom. Patrick O'Flynn, thanks for joining me today.
Lovely stuff, Michael. Look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Cheers.